Hello and welcome back to the third installment of the series of making my own tarot deck. I'm not going to lie, this card really took me a while, but I think it's worth the time I put into it, and I hope you enjoy. So let's begin with breaking down the concept and idea of the original card from the most well-known deck. Traditionally, the tarot card, the Hierophant, represents the masculine opposite to the High Priestess, also known as the Pope or the Teacher. When considering zodiac signs, the Hierophant corresponds with the zodiac sign of Taurus. The fifth card in the original deck depicts in total 3 figures, 2 of which have their back turned to the reader and 1 face on. The card can be broken down into 3/3 to more easily grasp its visual contents. The 2/3, starting from the top of the card, are connected by the protagonist and its background of the image, the background seemingly being a seat similar to a throne when it comes to its visual aspects. The backrest and headrest most accurately convey the similarities to a majestic throne. The sides of said back and headrests tend to stray from its similarity to a throne and rather convey the look of 2 pillars that are wider at their peak. They themselves can be split into 3 parts, with the top one being the wider circular part and the lower 2/3 connected by an organic curve, the thinner and linear yet still circular parts. They are mirrored perfectly by the imaginary vertical midway line of the card, adding to the overall robust and strong composition. This symmetry is supported and strengthened by other elements in this image, such as the main figure perched amongst these 2 towers and the initial seat. It wears a 3-tiered crown which extends to their chest right to where the nipples of the human anatomy lay, by 2 elongated linear and symmetrical extensions of the 3rd and lowest, thus also widest tier. The elements of the crown emulating the top of the traditional castle tops. Besides a crown, the figure is wearing a red garment most commonly known to be worn by a priest or the Pope, whilst the Pope is known to wear the white version. It's embedded with a collar and a long piece of fabric draping down the middle of it, which is embroidered with 3 or more crosses. Their hands are raised by their sides, for one extending the surface of the fabric and thus rewarding the composition with the characteristic of strength, but also drawing importance and focus. In their left hand, they carry a scepter, with a peak similar to their headpiece. The third of the image is connected through the overlapping of 2 planes, one containing the bottom half, more specifically the feet of the main figure, and the other containing the 2 identical additional figures and a X formed from the upward pointing keys. The 2 figures being identical to one another yet different to the main figure, both wearing an attire similar to the religious disciples and a head of hair that are balding at the top. Now, what does all of this actually represent? The main figure with the scepter, crown, and red garment is known to represent religious figures in society and their importance highlighted by the opposing pillars that establish a place of sacred holiness. Yet, this one differs from the sacred temple of the High Priestess. All he wears and carries with him comes in 3s, all representative of which he rules: the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious. His free hand points to the heavens and to the earth, showing its connection through the figure's presence. The identical disciples represent his followers, eager to learn that what is taught by the Hierophant. This depiction in total reflects the shared group identity and conformity the card displays when read. Lastly, the cross keys reflect balance between the conscious and the subconscious minds. In addition, the unlocking of mysteries which can only be taught by the Hierophant, perched above the given keys. This corresponds with the card's meaning in many ways. In its upright position, it represents spiritual wisdom, the wisdom shared by someone like the Pope, or in this case, the Hierophant, that preaches the words of God and in extension, Jesus, for example. Yet, it's important to mention that there are and can be different constellations of spiritual wisdom, depending on religion and personal beliefs. As well as wisdom and beliefs rooted in spirituality and religion, it speaks about conformity, tradition, and institution when pulled upright. The idea of homogeneous group, all following, believing, and doing as one, the loss of difference and variety. When pulled upright, the card calls the reader to make themselves familiar with the given, established, and trusted sources, with a focus on religious beliefs to be able to form their own opinion. Use the basis of discovered and secure belief system as a guide to form your own. This means a constructive work in league with mentors, teachers, and/or guides that widen your knowledge in aspects such as spirituality. This mentor can take their form in a kind and constructive helper who helps form connections to the divine and ease the reader's path. Yet, if that what has formerly been sought is established, then the reader might find themselves in the position of the teacher themselves. This means to share the earned knowledge through traditions and respect for what has been taught before and to you. The Hierophant in a further sense can also represent the containing of one's adventurous sides and rule-breaking thoughts and acts in its upright position. Besides learning and/or teaching, it also calls the reader in some cases to come back to traditions and habits that have since been neglected and discarded, asking to make amends through traditional and original prayers and graces. Lastly, when pulled upright, it calls the reader out on their conformity and comfortableness in homogeneous groups. Now, in its reverse position, it calls focus to personal beliefs, freedom, and challenging the status quo, the gaining of variety and individuality of groups, making them flourish with diversity. If pulled, the card suggests the reader to be in their own independent teacher and mentor. The wisdom sought out by the reader lies within oneself, and calls them to follow their own path and not blindly conform to other followers. Making the decision to follow one's own path and straying from the traditions can be confronted with a negative response from outer sources. Yet, when faced with the card's reversed appearance in one's reading, one is reassured in their own ways. The need for external approval isn't required anymore, and trust is placed with oneself. The reverse position can also signify rebellion and forging one's own path, rejecting rigid traditions, ways, and concepts that don't align with the reader anymore, allowing for more freedom and flexibility. So the card might foreshadow a rebellion of old ways, and deconstructing one's own views on the world and questioning its place in one's own views and beliefs. Now, my card most definitely appears to depict many different figures and things in it, opposed to the original card. One could say I've pulled the Hierophant in reversed, and now is questioning the card's look, and wanting to interpret its meaning myself in the personal ways of symbolism and metaphors, breaking the traditional status quo. In contrast to the traditional card's composition, I decided to split the card into two halves, a frequently occurring compositional decision you'll notice over the course of the entire series. This decision derives from the idea of incorporating the card's upright and reversed meanings into one cohesive design. So our design can be visually split into two halves, yet it contains three planes stacked upon one another, each layer able to stand alone, yet connected through sly and subtle overlaps of different elements of each figure and object contained in this image. You could potentially even argue that the image has four planes, with the closest two layers from the viewer's perspective being close enough to be considered as one, yet also far away enough to also be split into two individual planes. The layers row from front to back, starting at the bottom and ending at the top of the image. For comprehension reasons, I'll for one combine the first two planes of a four-part split into one, making it a three-planed observation, and secondly, I'll go through them from front to back, or in other words, from bottom to top. Once more, reflecting the idea of the Hierophant reversed. So, the first layer contains quite a lot of information, so I'll slowly guide you through my ideas. The concept of threes included in the traditional card has been separated from the previously coherent connection to the Pope figure and moved to the other figures in the card. In my design, we have three figures in the first plane, all representative of one or multiple coherent ideas of the reversed card. From left to right, we firstly have a woman rejecting the liquid which pours from the second and thus middle plane, her facial expression emphasizing the disdain of what is being poured onto her. Her outfit was a visual aspect I had to fight with. I wanted a red color, symbolizing the rebellion in it, yet it didn't really fit into the composition, so I muted the color and pushed it more into the purple tones, reflective of a rebellion and breaking tradition. In the middle and in the very front, we have a shirtless man with his head raised slightly upwards towards the middle and upper plane. The disdain of the first figure is disregarded and replaced with an almost empty yet accepting expression. His mouth open to receive the liquid also pouring onto him. A reflection of acceptance and conformity and learning from a trusted source, exactly like the upright calling of the card. To the very right, we have another woman dressed in green drapery and brownish details, such as a corset and a collar resembling a deer, a hat that changes quite a lot from the original, and resulting in a top hat which top has been turned into a simple water filter in which the liquid mentioned twice before also is pouring in. This reflects the idea of creating one's own path and altering that what is being taught, to fit into one's own views and ideas. This concludes the first plane. Moving to the second one through the connection of the flowing liquid, the second layer is filled by an inanimate figure, more specifically a golden statue of an angel. On its head, a bowl containing that what is dripped and flowed into the first layer. This angel takes the throne feel and vibe of the original card into account, and it also replaces the boring pillar I had decided on in the beginning. The angel being made out of gold truly challenged me due to my lack of skill to draw metallic surfaces. In the end, I do believe it turned out respectable. The angel also reflects religion and beliefs shared in many different views around the world and cultures. Its wings expand into the furthest layer, connecting them to create a fully weaved together composition. The third layer contains the Pope or priest character representative of the Hierophant. Having the status, power, and authority they own, they are placed above the viewer in a higher position. They still have the traditional frock and red accents, altered in small, and the crosses have been removed from their original place, and now replace the free and scepter-filled hands of the original card. The crown also has been removed, as the meaning of the crown also is partially reflected in the placement of the figure. In front of the Hierophant we have the Almighty Book, containing any information one needs, similar to the Bible, for example. Its contents dripping into the bowl on top of the angel's head. So, in conclusion, the ideas, concepts, and information the teacher, or rather the Hierophant, shares drip into a bowl which is fairly distributed its contents to the three figures at the bottom. One rejecting, one accepting, and one altering that what is provided. The angel signifying a sacred spot and reflecting the religious contents of the card. So we've cleared up the intentions, meanings, and symbolisms, metaphors we contain in this card, but I also want to talk about a few concepts and ideas that I struggled with and the original idea that I had sketched in my sketchbook. The very first draft of the sketch for this card is apparent in the very beginning of this Speedpaint, in which we have the pillar instead of an angel. We had 2 towers at each side of the Hierophant, more similar to the original card. The Hierophant figure itself also was a lot bigger than the 3 figures at the bottom, and the 3 figures at the bottom were all on the same level, and I changed that due to the composition and to give more interest to the card, and also to kind of fill the sides because it felt very empty when I was sketching it out on the computer, whilst in the sketchbook it filled the card layout I chose very well. It just didn't translate into the digital version. Now, I've also mentioned this in previous videos of this series, but usually when I'm creating or designing these cards, I try not to look at the original card. I just search up the most basic one-word meanings of the cards in its upright and reverse position, and then I just think of any composition, any ideas, concepts that come to my head, and I sketch them out. I don't really want a firm connection to the original cards, but they tend to overlap because the ideas are still the same. So for example, in my sketchbook, I just wrote down for the upright position, tradition, social groups, conformity, education, knowledge, beliefs, and for the reverse position, rebellion, unconventionality, nonconformity, new methods, ignorance, and that's all I noted down. That was all the points I had to jump off of. I always find it interesting to then later research the full card's meaning, all the little details it contains, and the actual traditional design, because there's a lot that overlaps, and there are a lot of ideas and even visual concepts that are very similar to the original card and my card. And I think that's just so interesting. Now, this might also be the cause of me loving tarot, and having seen the original deck beforehand does influence my decisions on the actual cards. But there are like 52 cards, I believe, in the deck themselves, and I could not remember all of them by heart. I am not that far yet. Besides coming up with a concept, I also wanted to talk about the process of drawing these figures. This is, I think, the first drawing on this platform that I've posted with more than 2 figures, I believe. I included 5 faces into this image. Now, that's a challenge, and that takes a lot of time, because arguably, the faces take the most time for me. Now, I've been practicing to draw faces a lot recently. There are a few videos on my TikTok, on my Insta, and I've been practicing a lot, but these practices are with gouache colors, so they're very simplified and not that detailed. And when it comes to a digital, fully completed illustration, I do want it to be a very rendered face, so it takes me a lot of time to do so. But I am very proud of the faces that I drew in this full drawing. I think I'm very happy with all of them, except for the Hierophant's face. It's a little muddy and not as refined as the other 4, but it doesn't really destroy the image, so I'm not too unhappy with it. Lastly, I've mentioned this already at the beginning when explaining the cards, but the gold details that overwhelm more than 2 planes of this picture really challenged me. I think that's the part where I put the most effort and time into, because I really wanted to improve on those aspects, and in the future and in following episodes of this series, I will be continuing to include gold details because they have become accustomed and they are almost relevant in each and every card of this deck. With the exception, of course, of the Fool, for example, or the Lovers, because I have a different idea for that and a different meaning that is supposed to be focused in it. And it will always be individual, and the amount of gold will always be different. And it also might not just be gold, it might also be metallic surfaces like silver. So it will differ, but I need to practice, and I'm glad I chose to add so much of it in this painting, just so I could practice a lot and I could see how it will look if there's more included than just small details. Now, I believe you've heard enough of my voice, so this completes the 3rd card in the series and the 5th card of the deck, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all next time. So, until then, take care.